It was a hot, humid August day in 1964, and the democratic process was boiling over. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was addressing a huge rally on the Atlantic City Boardwalk in New Jersey. The event was the National Democratic Convention, and the issue was the seating of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Hoisted high above the crowd were large posters of the three murdered civil rights workers, James Earl Chaney, Michael Henry Schwerner, and Queens College student Andrew Goodman. The bodies of the young men who had been registering black voters in Mississippi had been found 3 weeks earlier that summer. Dr. King and other civil rights leaders had toured the Deep South, driving media attention on the search and the pursuit of justice. Now they challenged the all-white representation of voting delegates at the Democratic Convention from Mississippi. All black members of the Democratic Party were excluded, with awesome activists like Fannie Lou Hamer, co-founder of the Freedom Democratic Party. They were going to be heard.
If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Listening to Dr. King's thunderous condemnation of these open sores of gross injustice was Dr. Stephen Schwerner, brother of Michael Schwerner, and a future Queens College Director of Counseling and Academic Senate Chair. He was joined at the rally by his wife Nancy and his father Nat.
In 1964, there was no black representation in the state of Mississippi at all. There were whole counties that were majority African American with no African Americans eligible to vote. A lot of people came to be supportive of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. We spent a lot of time at the convention and trying to get delegate credentials to get people from the Freedom Democratic Party seated inside the convention. And as I say, that I was there and my wife was there and my father was there.
Dr. King was deeply involved in traveling and speaking extensively throughout the Deep South, even in the face of discrimination, intimidation, and cover-up.
He did everything he could. It was important these murders be kept in public view so that people would know how folks were treated in Mississippi and as a generalization through a lot of the rest of the South. And it was certainly in King's interest, both politically and personally, to keep this publicity going because it was beneficial to the movement, and that King was certainly devoted to the civil rights movement.
9 months later, in May 1965, Dr. King was invited to the stage of Colden Auditorium at Queens College as the first speaker in the inaugural John F. Kennedy Lecture Series.
I certainly stand here under the inspiration of the fact that it was Queens College that gave to America, and indeed to the world, Andy Goodman, whose creative witness will certainly live for generations yet unborn. He, along with others, paid the supreme price for this struggle, and I'm sure that we will see in many ways that his death was not in vain.
It was emblematic of a long-standing connectivity between the life and legacy of Dr. King, Queens College, the three civil rights workers, and the civil rights movement. That connectivity is today exemplified by the In the Footsteps program, led by Rabbi Moshe Shore of the Queens College faculty who worked with Dr. King. Students visit the Southern civil rights sites where historic battles were fought and where hard-fought victories took root. In 2018, the Godwin Turnback Museum at Queens College hosted the traveling exhibit called Waging Peace, 100 Years of Action. A replica of Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail was featured. He wrote the letter in response to a public statement of concern by Southern religious leaders about his unjust imprisonment for leading nonviolent demonstrations against segregation in 1963. Dr. King coined the phrase, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." The civil rights legacy of Queens College rings strongly every day on campus when bells toll at the beginning of each hour from the Cheney Goodwin Schwerner Clock Tower at the Benjamin S. Rosenthal Library, which maintains a fulsome civil rights archive. 2014 was the year of the 50th anniversary of the three murders. A coalition of people and groups proposed honoring the civil rights workers posthumously with the highest national civilian award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Attorney Stuart Shorenstein, chair of the New York City and State practice of Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies, diligently collaborated with colleagues to work closely with the White House on the awards.
We live in a time of severe rhetoric coupled with threats and actual violence that are attacking the fabric of our nation and the walls of our democracy. What Goodman and Cheney and Schwerner tried to do was to preserve that democracy. It is so meaningful for the country to be reminded of the sacrifices that people made so that we could have a free democracy and one where every vote is recognized and every citizen is recognized.
For President Barack Obama, there was a special meaning attached to this prestigious recognition.
Is particularly important to him because the civil rights era helped change the voting patterns and the future of African Americans in this country. I don't know that in the 1960s an African American would have been elected president, but I do know in 2008 an African American was elected president, and it did stand on the backs of Martin Luther King and the Freedom Riders and all the others that paved the way.
In attendance at the November 2014 White House ceremony to accept the medals was Stephen Schwerner and Michael's wife, Rita Levant Schwerner Bender, a Queens College graduate. Angela Lewis, daughter of James Earl Cheney, and David Goodman, brother of Andrew Goodman.
On June 21st, 1964, three young men, two white and one black, set out to learn more about the burning of a church in Neshoba County, Mississippi. James Earl Cheney, 21 years old. Andrew Goodman, 20 years old. Michael Henry Schwerner, 24 years old. Young men. And in that Freedom Summer, these three Americans refused to sit on the sidelines. Their brutal murder by a gang of Ku Klux Klan members shook the conscience of our nation. It took 44 days to find their bodies, 41 years to bring the lead perpetrator to justice. And while they're often remembered for how they died, we honor them today for how they lived, with the idealism and the courage of youth. James, Andrew, and Michael could not have known the impact they would have on the civil rights movement or on future generations. And here today, inspired by their sacrifice, we continue to fight for the ideals of equality and justice for which they gave their lives.
Shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall